As you'll note from our title, Section 12 is moving on from full container load, and now we're going to get into less than container load shipping, both the service and pricing model. We'll start off with an analogy and say that much like an air freight forwarder offers freight consolidations, air freight consolidations, NVOCCs offer ocean freight consolidation services, which is essentially the exact same thing, just a different mode of transportation. Second bullet point. The NVO offers shared space in an ocean container to importers shipping from the same origin/destination during the same time frame. Importers in the Seattle area that are bringing in merchandise from Japan, for example, at the same time of the month. Last bullet, importers can use LCL, as it's called, less than container load services from an NVO when their vendors don't have sufficient cargo to fill a container themselves. It makes sense. Why pay for a full container load if one can't fill the entire container? That's really the benefit that LCL brings, as we'll see in a moment, where the shipper and or importer pays for the actual space or weight that they occupy in the container. As a brief aside, and we'll talk about this more in just a bit, LCL is also used when there is too much cargo for a single 20 or a 40-foot container, sometimes referred to as overflow. Maybe somebody's shipping very dense cargo that takes up the weight capacity of a container rather quickly, and they have 5 or 6 cubic meters left over. Now what do? They can ship that as LCL. Again, we'll talk about that in just a bit. The reason why this type of service is called a consolidation is because the forwarder is bringing together or consolidating cargo from multiple shippers. And since our perspective is that of the importer, these consolidations are taking place overseas, in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America. They could be anywhere. Since we're the importer, we're looking at forwarders in a country of origin that is consolidating cargo on behalf of importers bringing goods into the United States. The real key, as we see in our sub-bullet, is to gain cargo from as many shippers as possible with the same port pair, same origin, same destination, date of export from the country of origin, and service requirements. As we said, very similar to air freight, which of course we'll go into great detail when we get to that module. As a trade tip, to bring some additional terminology to the table, in the world of ocean freight, an LCL consolidation service is also known as groupage. That's a European term, but not unusual to hear that at all. LCL and groupage, same thing. Before we go on, let's point out in our image to the right-hand side, this is a typical looking consolidation facility, most likely in Asia. They're not very fancy, but very practical. Multiple doors that are covered to protect from the rain and rainy seasons. Oftentimes multi-story buildings with good patio size, good container yard size, so trucks can move around. This is what a CFS looks like in Asia. Getting back to our bullet points. Within an ocean import consolidation, each importer shipment is identified by a document that the ocean freight forwarder prepares, known as a house ocean bill of lading, a HOBL as it is sometimes referred to. To use an analogy, just like every passenger on an aircraft requires a ticket with their name on it, same idea for consolidated ocean freight. Every shipment from every shipper going to every importer requires a house ocean bill of lading that identifies each shipment within the consolidation. As we'll see in a moment, you could have 2 shippers in one consol, each with 10 cubic meters apiece. You could have 50 shippers in a consol with 1 cubic meter apiece. It's usually somewhere in the middle, but that conveys the idea of multiple shippers in an ocean consolidation. Second bullet, the key to the ocean import documentation process. House ocean bills of lading capture vital information on who the shipper is, who's the supplier overseas, who's the consignee, the importer in the United States for us, any notify party, perhaps notify a customs broker at destination in the U.S., and characteristics of the transaction, and also who the forwarder is. When we talk about characteristics of the transaction, of course, we're talking about pieces, weight, cubic meters, for sure, description of the cargo, those types of things. Trade tip, we already said this, the house ocean bill of lading, it's analogous to the house airway bill for an air import shipment, which we will study in detail in that upcoming air module. Something that we mentioned a brief moment ago, an LCL consolidation can have as few as 2 house bills or as many as there are shippers in a groupage container. We said 50, that's probably an exaggeration, but certainly not unusual to see 10, 20 shippers in one container taking up different amounts of space and weight in the container and having a house bill assigned to their specific shipment. Something a little bit different we mentioned in our second bullet point, consolidators, these ocean freight forwarders, have to account for all the hobbles and show the entire details of the container, everything in the container, pieces, weight, cubic meters, etc., on another bill of lading known as the Master OBL, the Master Ocean Bill of Lading. Just like in air freight, there's an MAWB, a Master Airway Bill. Same thing for ocean freight. It accounts for all of the pieces, all of the weight, all of the cubic meters in that container. Interesting to point out, and it certainly makes sense, in our third bullet, that Master OBL, it shows the consolidator as the shipper and their office or agent at the U.S. destination as the consignee. Again, each individual house bill is going to have its shipper and consignee in the United States. That's a different story. But the NVOCC, the ocean freight forwarder that is contracting with the steamship line to provide this service, has to account for everything in that container and also conduct their business with the steamship line. For example, how much is the consolidator going to pay the steamship line? The Master OBL captures all of that information. Shows the shipper as the consolidator at origin and their officer or agent in the U.S. at destination as the consignee. Quick trade tip at the bottom, LCL cargo, when it gets to the U.S., is offloaded at a bonded container freight station as each shipment awaits customs clearance. We'll talk more about this in our customs module, but every consignee, every importer that appears on a house bill of lading has to clear their own shipment. A consolidated container doesn't get cleared all at once because there are multiple consignees, multiple importers bringing in cargo in that container. Each one has to do their customs clearance separately. That requires that when goods get to the United States, they go to a CFS, a warehouse that is bonded, meaning that it's licensed and under the auspices of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Containers are offloaded there. They're physically in the country, but they haven't entered into the commerce of the United States. They haven't cleared through customs yet. We will see a lot of this when we get to the customs module, but it's important to point that out now so we set the stage for that later discussion. Last slide in this section, somewhat of a summary, but important to mention another factor called weight or measure. The title being Working with LCL Cargo. In addition to full container load service, FCL, properly licensed NVOCCs can offer an ocean freight consolidation service known as LCL, less than container load. We've been talking about that for a good 10 minutes now. Similar to its consolidated air freight relative, LCL service consists of offering shared space in an ocean container to multiple shippers that have cargo moving from the same port of origin to the same port of destination within the same time frame. And it's the U.S. importers that are bringing this cargo in. Second paragraph. LCL services offer many advantages to BCOs because an importer can contract for the exact amount of space in a container that he or she needs. As such, the overseas vendor doesn't have to worry about having too much or not enough cargo to fill a 20 or a 40-foot ocean container, or a 40 high cube or a 45-footer for that matter. Here's where things get a little bit different. Expressed on a weight or measure basis, W/M, charges are assigned by the cubic meter. This is the unit of measure for ocean freight, where the shipping party, the vendor, or the importer, depending on the Incoterms rule, pays for either the actual or volume weight of the shipment. We're going to get into this in detail in upcoming sections, but the whole concept of volume versus actual weight is really, really important. Dense cargo versus voluminous cargo. Ocean carriers, truckers, airlines all have ways to account for really voluminous, fluffy cargo like ping pong balls, as we'll see in an upcoming example, or really dense cargo like ball bearings that we'll also see in an upcoming example. Don't worry about that for now. Let's get the terminology down, the idea around actual versus volume weight, and this whole concept of weight or measure. Let's just get that planted in our minds, and we'll come back to it in just a bit. Last sentence. Much like a house airway bill, an HAWB, each ocean shipment in an LCL container is assigned its own house ocean bill of lading. We know that distinguishes the goods from the cargo of other parties, and each shipment has to be cleared through customs individually. That's it for section 12. We'll continue on with our LCL story upon your return.